Another boring Tuesday in Jetsland as the New York Jets have officially cleaned house. Joe Douglas has been fired as the general manager of the New York Jets. For those of you joining us here, this is Rich Sports Talk, your home for all the latest and greatest on the New York Jets. Make sure to check out our community page where we have a bunch of fun stuff, including a poll. Did the Jets make the right decision by firing Joe Douglas? And basically, as I'm looking at it right now, I have to redo the poll. There was an error, but did they make the right call with firing Joe Douglas? And you're going to have three options, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, no, and also no, but they would have at the end of the season. So again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here on a Tuesday night. If you're joining us after the live stream, you can check us out wherever podcasts are streaming, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Spreaker, and iHeartRadio. We have a lot to break down here. Joe Douglas's full tenure, which means I will be doing a full grading of all of his draft picks coming later this week. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. We will talk about all of his draft picks, why the Jets did this now, what this timing means, what it means for their Hall of Fame quarterback, and much, much more. But let's start off with the very basic. Joe Douglas had his moments here. He made some great trades. He made some very good draft picks. But all in all, at the end of the day, when you look at Joe Douglas, and if I was to say, take the Jets name off of this, if I was to go up to an NFL person and say, hey, I'm going to give you a blind resume and tell me what you think. If I was to tell you that a general manager was going to be fired with a record of 30-64, two things would probably come out of their mouth. The first thing would be, number one, absolutely. The second would be, well, why did it take so long to get over 90 games to get that sample size? That's Joe Douglas's record. But actually, it really isn't when you think about it, because it's kind of an asterisk. His first season, one of the most successful, was when this team went 7-9 with Adam Gase. Who could have seen that? But we forget Joe Douglas was appointed after the draft that Mike Maccagnan had. So basically, he didn't really get in charge of roster creation until 2020. If you factor that in, he's actually 23-45 as a general manager. Not really great. And look, Joe Douglas made some great trades. The Jamal Adams trade was a great trade. He made some great signings. Quincy Williams was a great signing. John Franklin Myers was a great signing. He made some good picks. Sauce Gardner, the 2022 draft class. But at the end of the day, when we look at the full body of Joe Douglas's tenure, yes, has it been technically better than other GMs in the past for this Jets team? Sure. But at the end of the day, Joe Douglas missed on the three most important things when you are building a football team. Number one is a quarterback. He had one shot at it, failed in the draft. Had a shot to maybe keep one other quarterback with Sam Darnold and build around him. Didn't take that option. Then traded for Aaron Rodgers. That has not worked. He got two times, sorry, it's a little tongue-tied, to fix the quarterback position. He whiffed at left tackle, and he whiffed at head coach. Now, granted, he had some great picks over the years. But when you look at the entire picture and the most important things for a GM, there are certain things you cannot miss on. You can't miss on offensive tackle, and he did. You cannot miss at quarterback, and he did. Because when you do, there is a negative domino effect that impacts the franchise. And I'll go through all the picks, but let's look at the two most polarizing picks of the Joe Douglas tenure. Let's start with Mekhi Becton. So let me take you back to the Jets drafting Mekhi Becton. They had the opportunity to draft him or Tristan Wirfs. Now, again, Becton, when you were to create an offensive tackle in Madden, looked like the part. But again, concerns about injury, health, and work ethic were questions. You had Tristan Wirfs, who at the time, I know a lot of people were looking probably better at guard, but I thought really good athlete, could play left tackle. The Jets passed on Tristan Wirfs and went with Mekhi Becton. One's an all-pro, and one's been a major bust. Let's see if you can guess which one. And because of that pick, it impacted what the Jets have done on the offensive line now for the last 5.5 years. Because one thing about Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas, and I get it with front offices, they want their picks to work. So what did the Jets do? Even though Mekhi had issues his rookie season, only played in 13 games and gave up 7 sacks. But what did the Jets do? They went all left tackle. They wanted to be the left tackle of the future. They brought in George Fant. They had Morgan Moses as a high-end backup. But wait a minute. Becton goes down early in his second season. Moses plays 17 games, looks great. Fant looks decent at left tackle. But then the Jets have a decision. Who do you keep? George Fant? Do you keep Morgan Moses? They had Morgan Moses in the building. They made a great signing. They let him walk. And since then, they've been trying to figure out the tackle position. Because of the tackle position, the Jets also had to reach in the 2021 draft, which we'll get to, the 2020 draft, which we'll get to in a sec. But the Jets could have selected other players in that position of the team, but they had to go offensive line because they missed with Mekhi Becton. The Jets have basically, until this year, 5.5 years, it took 5.5 years to build a decent offensive line with multiple picks. And some of those picks, AVT, health issues, Carter Warren, not sure if he's going to be a role player on this team going forward. Max Mitchell. The Jets had plenty of capital invested in this offensive line. It took until this year to start looking halfway decent. But even then, it's not a great offensive line. And then you look at the Zach Wilson pick. Now, look, back at the time, I will admit, I thought Zach Wilson was the best pick of the draft. It wasn't a great draft after Trevor Lawrence, let's be honest. I thought at the time that Zach Wilson, of all the quarterbacks, had the most upside. And if you hit it right and you were able to maximize his talent, that he could be a great quarterback. The problem is with being a quarterback, we see this all the time. We see a lot of really talented quarterbacks, but do they have what it takes between the ears? And Zach didn't have it. They made that decision, and they kept doubling down on Zach, even when we knew it wasn't going to work. And they kept pushing it. And then last year, the Jets had an opportunity with Aaron Rodgers and a top 5 defense. And even though Aaron Rodgers went down week 1, he went down 4 plays in. But the Jets had a great decision because instead in the offseason of jettisoning Zach Wilson, which they probably should have, to give him a fresh start and get a legitimate backup quarterback, they didn't. Because they thought Aaron Rodgers was somehow going to resurrect Zach Wilson at the end of this experiment, even though his contract would have been done before that. But I digress. Instead, Zach Wilson gets thrown into the fire again. And while we're screaming and begging Joe Douglas to do something, and I said it at the time, it felt like this front office and this coaching staff basically got a mulligan for last year, which is unfortunate because if it came from ownership, that is a damn shame. Because this team, if you had anything at quarterback last year, could have probably snuck into the last spot of the playoffs. But then coming into this year, and again, on the surface, it looks like Joe Douglas did a lot. He signed Tyron Smith. He drafted Olu Fashanu. He did a really good job with the offensive line. But there was a couple problems. The big one is the strength of the team last year was the defense, more specifically the defensive line. And I said this on the last episode. I kind of got this feeling that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, maybe I'm wrong, but the way I read into it, it almost felt like they were smarter than the room, that they were going to find the diamonds in the rough and that they could develop anyone. It's like, Bryce Huff was an undrafted free agent, but we turned it into a 10-sack guy. We can do that with a bunch of undrafted players and the Tack McKinley off the scrap heap. And, Javon Kinlaw's got all this talent. It felt like there was this sense of we can basically find the diamonds in the rough. We don't need the proven guys. We don't need Solomon Thomas or Sheldon Rankins from the year before or Bryce Huff or more damning John Franklin Myers. Instead, they traded for Hassan Reddick, who basically held out for 8 weeks. And if I was to tell you, and like I said, the Jets again in the national media, I get it. is I can't believe the Jets fired Joe Douglas. Well, they were going to fire him at the end of the season. If anything, the Jets did a actual smart thing because number one, they did right by Joe Douglas and let him put him out of his misery. And number two, they got a head start on this GM search. And I will get to the GM search in a little bit because I do think it will be very important for how this team is. We'll get to your comments and questions too. But if I was to look at this whole picture in a nutshell with Joe Douglas, he had some decent signings. He had moments. Quincy Williams was a great signing. DJ Reed was a great signing. But at the end of the day, when you miss at the quarterback and the offensive line, and for everyone saying, oh my God, Joe Douglas was a drafting genius, let's look back at the drafting history, right? Because again, you need to hit in the first round. And for the most part in his career, Joe Douglas has done that in the first round. But really good GMs, the ones that keep their jobs and the ones that build successful teams, they really hit rounds 2 through 7. 2020, Mekhi Becton, first round, bust. Round 2, Denzel Mims, bust. Round 3, Ashton Davis, the only person still on that team, still on the team, role player, third rounder, overrated, will be gone probably at the end of this year. Jabari Zuniga, out of the league within 2 years. LaMichael P. Ryan, out of the league. James Morgan, who the reason they drafted was they wanted to have another quarterback in the room to pick the brain of Sam Darnold. Wait a minute. So you're not going to bring in a veteran for Sam, but we'll bring in another rookie. No, we won't get an offensive lineman or a receiver or a tight end. We'll bring in another quarterback. Great plan. Cameron Clark, unfortunately injured. Not much there. Bryce Hall, the cornerback, had some moments. Braden Mann, most notoriously made the biggest, most infamous tackle in Jets history. I guess he's still in the league, but you go to the next year, 2021, Zach Wilson. We know what that had. Elijah Vera-Tucker, not bad, but then if you look at it, the Vikings trade back and got Morris Darsal, the great left tackle. So they got a great left tackle, and the Jets got an injured guard at 14. Elijah Moore, second-round pick 34, was off the team in 2 years. Michael Carter, the running back, off the team in 2 years. Jamian Sherwood, finally making some dividends this year. Okay pick. Michael Carter II, probably his best day 3 pick. Jason Pinnock, had to cut him so he could start for the Giants. Hamza Nasruddin, gone. Brandon Eccles makes a couple plays, not bad. Jonathan Marshall, gone. Then 2022, we all know. Again, this was a great class. But looking back, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, great picks. Jermaine Johnson, again, everyone thought, and he was a top 10 player on my board, smart pick to trade up to get him. Breece Hall, number 1 running back on a lot of boards. Then after that, Jeremy Rucker. It's been a better story than a player. Max Mitchell has been a disappointment. And Michael Clemens has been the Achilles heel of this defense. Congratulations. So let's go back to 2023. Will McDonald coming into his own this year, but the Jets could have also drafted some pretty good receivers there too. Even though the Will McDonald pick is looking better, there were still questions at the time. Joe Tippmann, solid pick. Carr Warren, we don't know what he is. Israel Abanikanda, still looking for him. Zaire Barnes, role player at the bench. Jared Bernard Converse, nothing. Zach Kuntz, practice squad. Jalen, this last draft, Olu, good pick, but he also fell to the Jets. Malachi Corley, Malachi Corley, and this is again a lesson to GMs. You can love players, but the way the Jets talked about Corley, where they showed the goofy text, how he was the 5th receiver on their board. They couldn't wait to get him. They were going to trade up in the first round to get him. If he's so good, how can he not play on a team that really only has 2 receivers right now? Braylon Allen, decent pick. Jordan Travis, who knows? Isaiah Davis, role player. Quantez Stiggers, I'm hoping he plays in the second half of the season. And Jalen Key isn't even on this team right now. So again, there's good moments in there. There's good moments. But when you look at the whole picture, There's a lot of bad. Let's get to some of your comments here, and then we will get back into the nitty-gritty and also talk about why now. That's the big question I keep hearing from Jet fans. Why now? And I think there's a very specific reason. James, people were always saying you had a great draft. And look, I think 2022 was a great draft. But again, I think a good point, and Connor Rogers made a great point on this. If you don't hit on your top 40 picks, you're really going to be out of a job quickly. And that was one of those drafts where, yes, they hit on that draft, but think about how many for every single first round pick they've hit on, they've had a lot of questions. Tony Alexio, a happy day in Jetsville. We know where Tony stands. That man, even the 22 class doesn't look as hot as they were 3 months ago. I mean, Dano, I get it, but it's one of those things I still think is a good draft. So Kev, I look at this in two ways. Officially, it's 30 and 64. However, I think there's an asterisk next to that because the first season, if you remember, he came in June. So he didn't really get to tweak the roster after that first McCagnon draft. And that team went 7-9 with Adam Gase, which to now seems like a freaking miracle. So if you take that season out, and when he was actually had a draft going into a season, he is, as a general manager, I have this pulled up, 23 and 45. Great. Let's tar and feather Hackett. I mean, I think he's out of the building, Tony. I think he's getting coffee. We reserve our mess because we let Aaron Rodgers run team. All coaches have been fired last year. And look, this is the thing. For Jet fans, it's doubly frustrating because this coaching staff and this front office, it just seemed like they were coasting last year. They cost this team the chance to compete because they refused to address the quarterback position. And look, this season, I know that there's been the reports that basically ownership kind of took over after they fired Saleh. But again, the Johnsons have their issues. I'm not defending the Johnsons. I don't love I hate when owners meddle. But a part of me wonders if you're the Johnsons watching this. And again, maybe we'll find out in Joe Douglas's memoir that he wanted to get a quarterback in 2023, but the Johnsons told him not to, that they were punting on that season. But a part of me just looks at this season and goes, you had kicking issues in the preseason. You didn't address them. You let Greg Zuerlein cost you a game. Greg Zuerlein cost this team a couple games early in the season heading into that Buffalo game. Now, again, I think the decision to fire Saleh early, I didn't love it. I think it was basically a Hail Mary pass at that point because let's be honest, the team did not look good for 2 weeks. The team, and again, everyone's like, well, they were playing for first place. But basically it was, okay, the Jets beat a crappy Patriot team on a short week at home. They beat a crappy Titan team where Will Levis gave them the game. And in the previous 2 games, they played a Bronco team that, again, at the time we didn't think was great, but they basically blew that game, and then they blew the game in London. So you had no faith in this team. They were going the wrong direction. And look, they made a decision. We said at the time it was going to determine the outcome of this season, and it did. And it did. And look, Joe Douglas, like he brought all these players for Aaron Rodgers. They brought all these pieces for Aaron, and it doesn't work. But I'll get to Aaron in a sec. Our new GM will take the keys of Jetsville from Rodgers, Tony. I agree. To lose 3 quality starting while overhauling the O-line, that's a recipe for look, the O-line too, like John Simpson's been a great signing. But outside of that, like I think Olu will be a good player. I mean, Tyron Smith was a disaster. I'm looking around. They should have never traded Moses. Then they had to give up all those picks to get him back. And the other thing too with this defensive line, like I said, I felt like it was a little bit hubris. It felt like hubris where it was like, okay, we're so talented that we're going to get the most out of these guys that no one believes in. And you felt like, okay, but it's not like you guys are coming off a playoff run. It's not like you guys have won anything here. So it feels like, again, Saleh, I don't know if it was false confidence, Saleh and Douglas with Rodgers this year, but man, it just blew up in everyone's face. And yes, Tony, they did sign the kicker. So, all right, guys, again, give us a like, give us a subscribe, follow us on Twitter. Make sure to check us out on where podcasts are available. But guys, I have a bit of a theory. And again, my favorite thing today is probably the ghost of Manish Mehta rising and giving out Joe Douglas's number on Twitter, which I thought was hilarious. It's like Mehta, of course, dies with Douglas, but resurrects the second he comes back. So I talked about like the perception from the national media that the Jets are foolish. But again, if you took the Jets name off of this and you put Jacksonville and the Jacksonville said, oh, the Jacksonville Jaguars, week 12, fired their GM for going 30-62, no one would bat an eye and say, it's about time. It's too long. But of course, since it's the Jets, everyone's going to now come out and support it. It's funny, like 3 weeks ago, everyone's saying how poor this roster is, how bad the construction of this roster is in the national media. How could they do this? How could they acquiesce to Aaron? And then all of a sudden, the second Joe Douglas has gone, oh, I can't believe they would fire Joe Douglas. Like, they're treating Joe Douglas like he's Ozzie Newsome. Like, again, I think he made some good moves and he made better draft picks than a lot of former Jets GMs, but he also made some bad trades. He didn't make great free agent signs. He signed Corey Davis. He signed certain receivers to big money. He signed Carl Lawson to big money. Those guys did not pan out. He signed a bunch of offensive linemen year after year, and none of them until this year really worked out. Really, the first free agent one to work out was John Simpson. That's really the first offensive lineman in free agency that they brought in that has actually worked. But here's the big thing, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about this. And I think people are asking the question, why now? And I think that's very important. And I don't think it's really being discussed on a lot of these channels or nationally. Why now? It just seems odd. Well, why going into the bye are they doing this? Why are they doing this now? And I think there's two very important reasons. The second one's the most important one. But the first one, I think, is legitimate. With the presidential election and with the chances that Woody is probably going abroad, he wants to get a head start on the GM search. He knows this season is over. He knows that they have to gut this thing down to the core, and he wants to get a head start. And granted, I know this is a hard job to sell. I know people will say that the Johnsons, no one wants to work for them. I get that it's going to limit candidates, but the thing is, there's only so many GM jobs in the National Football League. And again, getting a head start on it is good, even though I know a lot of fans don't trust. And again, I'm one of them. You got to show me. You have. Right now, we can't hope anymore until we see something. We've been sold a bill of goods. We actually need to see the goods before I think we believe in this team again. But again, I think that this team's in a better position than when Douglas came in. There's talent on this team. There's some nice building blocks on this team. You have some pieces you could potentially trade. Again, the cap won't be the best decision in the world, but I think the Johnsons want to get a head start on the GM search. But here's the most important reason. And I say this all the time on this channel. Actions to me always will speak louder than words, because people can tell you what they think. They can always say something to the media. They can release statements. But what you do, your actions are what define you. What happened this weekend? Well, obviously the Jets, any hope of a playoff run, and again, we didn't really have any, but realistically, any shot died this weekend with the Colts game. I think that's a big part of this. But what happened this weekend? And I think it's very important to talk about. It was the Connor Hughes story. And again, I think Connor Hughes is pretty in touch with his locker room, and he brought up a really good point. And he said Aaron Rodgers wants to come back and play in 2025. But there is a major caveat to that. And what was that major caveat? It was he wants stability. He wants the same people in charge, and he wants the same coaching staff. Well, this to me is a pretty clear inclination. And again, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Chris Johnson and the Johnsons are friends with Aaron Rodgers. They love Aaron. They respect Aaron. I think that they are doing this for Aaron, because I think that they are basically going to do this. And think of the timing. What's another important thing with this bye? Why today? Well, they also did it because this week, Aaron's not on McAfee, so he doesn't have to go live to talk about this. I think that the Jets are basically sending a message to Aaron Rodgers. It didn't work. We're clearing house. We're gutting this thing down to the core. We are going to hire independent people. If they decide they want to keep you for a season, fine. But if you don't want to be a part of that, or if they don't agree for you to be here, we're either going to do one of two things. We're either going to cut you, take the big cap hit. And again, it will be painful. It will be tough, but you see it can benefit teams. It was a difficult decision for the Broncos with Russell Wilson. They ate a lot of crow with that contract, and they'll be eating a lot more crow than the Jets with this contract. But it ultimately was the right decision because they hired the right coach and they got the right quarterback in there. And they're looking like they're going in the right direction. And that's what the Jets are looking for. And Kyrie Hughes even said, this organization is looking for the next quarterback. They have Tyrod Taylor under contract. I think he's a good bridge quarterback. He's a 10th of the cost with the 10th of the drama of Aaron Rodgers, probably 100th of the drama of Aaron Rodgers. But I think it's a clear message to Aaron. And I think one of two things is going to happen after this bye. I think number one is if Aaron feels healthy enough, you're going to see him try to play extremely well. And again, I know it might hurt the Jets draft stock, but I think he's going to start all of a sudden because he's afraid to push the ball down the field. And that's been a major criticism and take chances. Well, I could see Aaron Rodgers trying to throw deep, make big plays, and try to sell himself to people. See, I still got it. I still have it. And he'll try to sell the Jets. I still have it. We can run it back. But I think the Jets have already made it clear they're going in another direction. But I think like the hope that the Jets are having is that some team will be desperate enough to take Aaron Rodgers, that some team will give them a late draft pick and eat some of the salary. Not all of it. The Jets will probably eat the majority of it, but there will be some team that will take it. Maybe there's a team in the NFC that gets desperate enough to make a trade. Maybe there's someone that wants some box office. Maybe the Panthers, if they don't feel Bryce Young is the guy and they just need a holdover with Aaron Rodgers. Again, I don't really see a great landing place for Rodgers. I think the Jets are hoping they'll get something instead of just straight cutting him. But I get this feeling that that's option one. Rodgers comes back after bye, balls out, tries to make his stats gaudy and try to put some good tape out there. Or I think the other thing. I think that Rodgers, who's I really think is banged up, is going to put himself on the IR or basically take a couple weeks off and basically sell on McAfee and tell the football world, hey, guys, no, the reason I've been bad this year is I've just been hurt. I've been hurt since like week 3 or 4. Look, I gutted out for my teammates. I did everything I could for the Jets. It just didn't work out. It's just not going to work out here. I need to take care of my body. I need to recover. I need to heal. Like I could see one of those two scenarios happening. And again, I think the timing is very important. Why did this happen? I think it was to give Joe Douglas basically relief because he's not doing anything. He's pretty much, I mean, we all knew this too. Like every national media member's acting shocked that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh were fired. And I wouldn't have fired him midseason, but everyone knew coming into the season they were lame duck coaches. If they didn't make the playoffs, heck, if they made the playoffs but didn't win a playoff game, there's a good chance both of them were gone. So I just get this feeling that the Jets are sending this message to Rodgers and his camp during this bye. Maybe they'll have a meeting during this bye. Who knows? But I think it's a message to this team. Look, we're going to evaluate these next 6 games, see who's playing hard, see who's a part of this future, play some more of the young guys, maybe rest some of the older guys. Like this is basically, and look at the Jets schedule. I mean, I think they're going to finish with 4 or 5 wins at the most. Like their schedule is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. So I think that the Jets are basically going to look to try to get into the top 5. Again, they play Jacksonville, which will help them if they can lose to Jacksonville. I know we're watching the Tankathon where the Jets are currently 7th, but look, I think that they did this during this bye to send a message to Rodgers in that camp. Look, Aaron, we're rebuilding this. We're gutting everything down to the core. We know you like comfortable. And look, I don't think Rodgers is going to want to be here. It's clear that the reason he chose the Jets is because the Jets gave him everything he wants. And again, the Jets did it to a fault. The Jets, again, you can blame the Jets for giving into Rodgers, but when you miss on Zach Wilson and you have to placate the star quarterback, Rodgers is a very needy quarterback. And again, the Jets did everything he wanted. They got everybody he wanted. Allen Lazard, Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb. Like they did everything they could to make him happy. They did everything that he said he needed. This year, of course, the offense isn't working well. Well, it's because they don't have Devontae yet. When Devontae's on the field, you're not throwing it down the field, or you're not on the same page as Devontae, and you're 1 of 6 over 10 yards in the last 2 games. It's bad. And like I just get this feeling like so much is going to happen during this bye week, like with Rodgers. I just get this feeling that the reason the Jets did this now was to send a message to Rodgers. So now he has a couple weeks to figure out what he's going to do. He now has this bye week to figure out a couple of options. Option 1, I feel good enough to play. I want to prove I can still play. I want to play in 2025. The best way for me to do that is go out and put up a bunch of flashy stats, throw for like 250 and 2 touchdowns every week, show that I can still throw the ball down the field, and then tell everyone in McAfee, I was banged up, but the bye really got to rejuvenate. My body feels great. We finally got in sync, but I think it's going to be trying to showcase his talent for another team. Or I think another scenario is I wouldn't be shocked that after the bye, all of a sudden, Rodgers is on the injury list or the 4-week IR and comes on and says, I was gutting through a lot. My reason my play was terrible is I was banged up. I got rolled up in the Viking game. I tried to tough it out because I was there for my teammates and I wanted to do this for them and the Jet fans. But now that we're out of the playoff run, I think it's best for me to just, rejuvenate my body, get my body right for next season. If I'm good in 4 weeks, I'll come back and play. Like I could see all these scenarios coming to fruition. I can see all these scenarios. And again, tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I am wrong if you can't see any of those playing on McAfee. As soon as he said maybe getting rid of AR cadence truth. Yeah, like again, like the thing too is everyone's like saying, oh, Saleh, like the Jets would be so much. I really think the Jets would maybe be a game better. The max is 2. Like this is the same coaching staff that Saleh put together. It's the same scheme that Saleh put together. And basically they asked Aaron Rodgers to save them and it didn't work. Didn't we just go through a full rebuild? If you only survive, we have some building blocks compared to 2018. Yeah, the cupboard was bare. Even at the time, the best key the Jets had was Quinnen Williams. And even at that time, we were kind of looking at each other like, is Quinnen a bust in the first couple of years? But look, they have pieces. And again, I think mentally as Jet fans, we have to be prepared for the Jets to move on from some pieces we love, some players that we're really hopeful, some players we bought jerseys of. And look, again, a lot of it's going to depend on the head coach and the scheme that comes in and the building, who comes in as the GM. And look, I know it's hard because we have trust issues for obvious reasons that the moves they're going to make are the right decisions, that the players they're going to draft are the right players, that the scheme they're going to bring in. Look, like, for example, if they bring in, let's hypothetically say like a Brian Flores. Brian Flores loves playing a 3-4 defense. I mean, I could see Jermaine Johnson maybe being a fit in there as an end, but maybe they feel he's better off in a different scheme. Or can Will McDonald make the transition to a stand-up linebacker in that position? There's like certain pieces like Sauce Gardner. Maybe the new regime feels it's more valuable to get picks for him and use them to address other holes on this roster that may be fit. Like I just can see this team looking very differently next year. And again, it depends on who's coming in. Maybe the new GM, and again, I wouldn't personally do this, we'll look at Breece Hall and say, look, he's in the prime of his career. He's not going to be better. His value is never going to be higher. We don't want to pay him. We're going to be a team that's going to want to do a running back by committee. We want to invest in other positions. If we can get good capital for him, we will do it. Again, we have to be open to that. But again, they still have all these picks and they have some draft capital. The JFM trade is the nail in the coffin for the Joe D incompetence. No, Tony. The nail is not getting a freaking kicker to replace Zerline when he kept shanking kicks. That was the nail in the coffin. I just wonder if he knows the importance of a good head coach. I think he knows the importance. The problem is they can't find the right one. They can't find the right one. If AR wants to return, it has to be on the new GM's turn. Fire Hackett even hurts AR. Look, Hackett's basically fired. Hackett's basically been demoted. He's just hanging. He's just hanging around like he's gone. Look, the thing to Orlando is it shouldn't take 5 years, and that's the thing. Like people like saying Joe Douglas. I can't believe he got fired. I can't believe he got fired. He got 5 years. He got 5 years, over 5 years. Another great example is like the Giants. Daniel Jones got 6 years, and you're kind of like looking at the Giants going like, wait a minute, how did he get all those opportunities? How is he still around? Like, it kind of like the same with like Daniel Jones. Like, how did he last so long? Like that's kind of the thing you look at too, where you look at it for all these like all these general managers, and it's just crazy. It's just crazy. And like, again, I think a good example of, like you look at the executive positions, it's like I was actually thinking about this the other day. Like Joe Douglas has been here through 2 giant front offices, basically, and potentially a third if Joe Shane gets fired at the end of the season, which again, I wouldn't completely rule out. And like a great example is also the 2022 draft. You look at all those teams that picked in the 2022 NFL draft. You look at those top 10 teams, every single one of those teams that picked in the top 10 has made the playoffs. Again, there have been bad teams. The Jaguars are bad again, but at least they've treated their fan base to a playoff berth. The Giants treated their fans, the Texans, the Lions, the Jaguars. The only team in there that hasn't is the Panthers. That's it. The Falcons have. The Seahawks have. Jets are the only one. And again, we talk about that draft class ad nauseum. We talk about how great that draft class is. And look, I get it. It was a very good draft class for the New York Jets. But we can't overlook the bad drafts the Jets had. We can't overlook the 2020 draft. We can't overlook the 2021 draft. We can't overlook the 2023 draft and the decision to take Will McDonald. And again, it's looking better this season, but taking him over a receiver because the Jets since then have been looking for a receiver. They had to give up basically a 3rd-round pick to bring in Devontae Adams. The big thing I will be interested in, especially this offseason, again, it's too early to tell, is how much compensation picks the Jets will get. They're probably going to get a comp pick 3rd or 4th for Hassan. You hope they get a comp pick for Devontae to help reload the cabinet. Rich, if Rodgers retires, is our cap hit drastically reduced? I believe it's slightly reduced, but again, since the money was deferred, trying to think, hold on. Yeah, like I think that's a big one. So again, he did take a pay cut. I'm trying to think because he becomes a free agent technically after the 2025 season. Again, if they cut him after June 1st, they only will have. It's weird because it's like if they cut him after June 1st, it's only 14 against this year's cap, but then it's 35 in the 2026 cap. A weird way, I'd almost rather take the deferred money right now as opposed to waiting. But again, guys, check out the community page on our YouTube channel. Average Sports Talk. Did the Jets make the right call firing Joe Douglas? Yes, no, and no, but they should have waited till the end of the season. Guys, I gotta give you options. But look, like, let's look back. Like, I will go back. Like, let's play a game. Like, I'm going to do the full version of the grading in here later this week. But let's see. I'll get to some of your comments before I get to that. Martinez, nothing to lose yet. Like, one thing, too, according to the Jets, Jordan Travis hasn't even practiced, so he's basically treating this as a red shirt. I think if any quarterback's going to be Tyrod. Kev is making great points. If we lost the last game we won, the Jets might have traded other players. Well, that's the other thing. The Texans game really screwed things up because if they lost to the Texans, which I think they should have, then they basically could have traded off more pieces. We're screwed cap-wise for years. It's $49 million next year and $63 they earn after, I think. Yeah, again, Joe Douglas deferred a lot of this money. It was funny because at the beginning they did a great job, like I thought, handling the cap. But man, it was, it's just crazy. And I laugh, like, only the Jets, it's funny. The people that call the Jets the dumpster fire all season long, how terrible the Jets are. And again, I know ownership stepped in this year, and I think part of it too was basically it got to the point where this was coming off the rails and they were trying basically, taking a Hail Mary. It backfired horribly. And look, it's funny because the same people that are killing the Jets right now, basically saying, oh, they were a dumpster fire, they're doing terrible. It's like they're defending the Jets firing, and I know Todd McShay basically, ripped the Jets today. And I get him and Joe Douglas are buddies. But again, like everyone's like just rallying off, like, oh, like, oh my God, like I can't believe like Coward today and everyone calling out like, oh, the Jets have talent on this roster. Oh, they've done a great job building this roster. But the thing is, Joe Douglas missed on the quarterback. Joe Douglas missed on the left tackle. Joe Douglas picked Robert Saleh as a head coach, and he wasn't a great head coach. Like, again, do I think of all the pieces, like if I had to weigh it, do I think who did their job better? Was Robert Saleh a better head coach, or was Joe Douglas a better GM? I'd probably say, yeah, Joe Douglas is a better GM. But everyone's like, I just love how everyone's just rattling off like all the Jets hits. Like, oh my God, like he drafted this guy, he drafted this guy, he drafted this guy, he drafted this guy. Well, he also, drafted Zach Wilson, Elijah Moore, Michael Carter in the 4th round, Denzel Mims, Ashton Davis, Mekhi Becton, Jabari Zuniga. I mean, the 2020 draft set the Jets back so much further. Like, we can rip McCagnon's draft, but you look back and you're like, Quinnen Williams in his 2019 draft has been a good player. You know what? Like, Chuma Edoga has started 43 games in the NFL. I mean, Blake Cashman has turned into a pretty good linebacker in the NFL. Where you look at like Joe Douglas's 2020 draft, it was Denzel Mims isn't in the league. Ashton Davis is barely in the league. Zuniga's out of the league. P. Ryan's out of the league. Morgan's out of the league. Cameron Clark's out of the league. Like the only one left is Bryce Hall and Braden Mann. Like, again, I love everyone just basically jumping on the Jets, and I get it. But like I said, if you took the Jets name off the jersey or off the hat of Joe Douglas, and I was to tell you, oh, Jacksonville today fired their GM. He was 30-64 as a head coach. Or if I was to say, just looking at like Tankathon today, it's not the Patriots because like the Browns fired their head coach for going 30-64. Tennessee fired their GM for going 30-64. The first thing people would say is, why did it take so damn long? I mean, Joe Douglas got 94 games. 94 games. I mean, there's a chance that the Giants, for example, are going to be going on to their 3rd GM in the same amount of time that Joe Douglas had to run the Jets. And look, to me, he did a better job at drafting than previous GMs. Sure, he built a good roster. Sure, but he also put a lot of dead cap, and a lot of this was also, Aaron Rodgers was here. Like before that, did people really want to come to the Jets? I mean, like outside of DJ Reed, what's his best free agent sign? Carl Lawson? Corey Davis? No. Tyler Conklin? Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of okay, good moves. Not like, wow, great move. Outside DJ Reed, there's not a move you're like, wow, that was a great signing. Like, I just laugh because, again, like with the national media, like the same media, too, that's like calling the Jets a dumpster fire, that's making fun of the Jets for how bad they are and how basically Rodgers is the GM and all this stuff. The second that they fire the GM, it's, Joe Douglas, it's non-Joe Douglas. He failed the players are failing Joe Douglas or the coaching failing. Well, guess who picked the coaches? Joe Douglas picked the coaches. Like Joe Douglas also, yeah, he traded for a Hall of Fame quarterback. Would he have had to trade and spend all that assets and defer all that money if he hit on the quarterback in the first round? Would he have had to spend all those resources if instead of looking in a vacuum, he basically said, and this is a famous story, that basically when it came to decision time with Zach Wilson, they put Sam Darnold in the same room and they basically would say, okay, if we were drafting and Sam Darnold's in this draft, where would we pick him? And they made the decision as an organization that Zach Wilson would be a better National Football League quarterback than Sam Darnold. And yes, Sam Darnold has bounced around. He didn't work in Carolina. He didn't work with the 49ers. Yes, he's had a resurgence this year. Yes, he's come back down to earth, but I think we would all look at it and go, yeah, he's probably a better quarterback than Zach Wilson. And the Jets had the decision. And it was a decision, again, you didn't want to give him the fifth-year option for Sam. I know the timeline was a little wonky, but you had an opportunity to get a boatload of picks. And you could have gone either way. Because here's the other thing. They could have done the Sam Darnold experiment, and they could have said, you know what? We looked at it, and we came out of it and felt that this class of quarterback wasn't as good as Sam after Trevor. And we felt that the best thing for our organization was to build up through the draft and rebuild this roster. And if at the end of the season, Sam Darnold didn't work out, you know what? And you looked around the league at the other quarterbacks, you're like, well, at least they were right about the quarterbacks. It's just so frustrating. And I get the biggest part of this and why this is so painful is we sit here as fans, and I think like this is as hopeless as we felt because, again, we look at who's picking the people. And I think the very important thing for the Jets to do, I think the first step, if the Jets want to instill some faith and get goodwill with this fan base, and I've seen a bunch of ideas floated out there. I think one idea that I really like is picking a president of football operations to help head the department. I've seen Curtis Martin's name thrown out a lot. I would love that idea. I think that would be a very good idea. I would also look at former Jet players that really love this organization, that really care about this organization, like a Kerry Woods, a Willie Colon, a Bart Scott. I would bring them in and do like a former player summit and basically have them come in and say, okay, guys, we are looking for people to be in charge. We are looking for a president who is either a coach, a representative, or a player that you think would be a good fit for this role, would have passion for this role, and would be a good football decision maker. And then you work on it. Like, that's what I would do. I think Curtis Martin would be a great fit as like a team president or, a head of football operations. I would be ecstatic about that. I think it would be and I think it would show this fan base. And again, until it's the problem is perception. And the perception is the Johnsons will meddle until they don't. And but again, I think it'd at least be a good sign of faith to this fan base that they care about how this football team is perceived. Like, bring in people like a Rex Ryan, like guys who are passionate about the Jets, that are sick and tired of the Jets being a laughing stock. Bring them in there, okay? Bring them in there to come up with ideas. Bring them in there to be a think tank, to look at guys and like say, do you think Curtis Martin? Because a lot of people, when they brought a deal, you see a lot of players going, that's actually. And there's a couple of GMs, like Louis Riddick is a good candidate. There's some decent GM candidates out there. And I would really be looking hard at them. And you start the search now. Ray Agnew from the Detroit Lions is another one I really like as well. But we'll have to see what they invest in. But look, unfortunately, as Jet fans, until the Jets can win football games, this is going to be the sad reality. And I know we're sick of it. I think the biggest thing is we are just absolutely sick of being dragged through the mud. We are sick and tired of being the national punching bag. Because again, today, when the Jets make this move, there's a bit of a snicker. there's a bit of a snicker where it's like, of course, same old Jets. This is the Jets, of course. This is the Jets. Like, it's just so frustrating as a fan base. And again, I get why this fan base right now is at a low point because we're going through this again. And history has shown us that the Jets haven't picked the right people. But if they can get the right people, a lot will definitely change. Because we look at the Texans. The Texans hired a pastor at one point to run their football operations. But then they found the right GM, they found the right head coach, and they found the right quarterback. And look where they are now. Look at where they are now. Again, it is incredibly difficult right now for Jet fans because it is hard. I get it. There is not a lot to be positive about. But the big thing is when we look at this team and when we look at decisions, we know that the Jets have to make the right decisions when it comes to building this football team this offseason. That is, we know that. Do we trust they're going to get it right? I think most of us would say no, but we're hopeful. But the big thing is when you look at the big picture for football teams, you have to look at what is the right decision for the organization at the time. Again, there's risk in every decision, but there's certain decisions that you have to make. And I think the worst decision this team could have made was trying to sell this fan base for a third time a bill of goods that we're going to run it back with now a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers with a new head coach that doesn't get along with Aaron, and it's going to be another soap opera. And I get it. And look, I know the Johnsons want to make money. I know the Johnsons want the Jets to be respected. I know they don't want the Jets to be a punching bag. But you have to do this now because you cannot let this continue to build. And I think they're on the right path because, again, I think that the reason this decision was done now is to, A, get a head start on the GM search, basically signal to this team and this fan base, we know the season's over. We know this experiment has failed, but we are looking to course correct, and we are looking to make the decision to move on. And I think it's a big signal to Aaron Rodgers. I really believe that the reason this timing is done now is and don't forget, they did it on a Tuesday. Why did they do it on Tuesday? Because usually that's the day Aaron would be on McAfee. Like, I know he wasn't scheduled this week, but let's just play this game. What if the Jets fired Joe Douglas on Monday? Do you think Aaron Rodgers would magically appear on Pat McAfee on Tuesday? I think he would have. But instead, the Jets wait till Tuesday to make this decision. And I know people are saying, well, why the buy? Well, trade deadline's over. They're not going anywhere. There's no major decisions. At least they signed their kicker. And the big thing, too, is like, I think it's a show of good faith. And I know people are going to say, like, oh, the Jets, like, they do a terrible job of handling people. Well, they did the right thing by Joe Douglas. And if it comes up in the GM interview, you know what they can honestly say? You know, the hardest thing they're going to have to sell is the meddling. And they'll say, look, we understand. We tried meddling this year. It didn't work. If you're the Johnsons, say, look, here's the thing. We gave Joe Douglas over 90 games. How many teams give a GM 90 games and only win 30 of them? No, I can't think of another team in the NFL. They were incredibly patient with Joe. They gave him his entire contract, nearly 6 years. They were incredibly patient. They were incredibly patient with Robert Saleh. Now, again, the firing timing during the season, we didn't love, but they were incredibly patient. That's a lazy narrative. Oh, the Jets have a trigger finger. Yeah, during the season they did this year, but even at the end of last year, they still look at it. They gave Robert Saleh 60 games. They gave Joe Douglas 90 games. It didn't work. And look, Joe Douglas did a lot of great things. He made some really good trades. He made some really good decisions. He made some good decisions. He made the decision to go after Aaron Rodgers, which was his Hail Mary. But there are things that doom Joe Douglas. Long-term, his inability to draft a quarterback, draft a left tackle until this season, and build an offensive line was his macro, was getting a developmental quarterback and building an offensive line. And in the short term of the last 20 months, the biggest failure from Joe Douglas was not taking advantage of last season when you had a top 5 defense, when you could have gotten a veteran quarterback. Again, might not have been pretty with Joe Flacco, might not have been pretty with Carson Wentz, but you would have felt like at least this team could have competed until week 17 or 18 and been playing what this front office has been telling us, that they want to be playing meaningful games in December and not have their season over before Thanksgiving. But yet here we are again. And the other thing, too, was this season when you saw Greg Zuerlein not kicking well and you made the decision to let go of a really good kicker who's now one of the best kickers in the NFL with the Washington Commanders, and you made the decision to keep trying Zuerlein out there, even though we were all screaming, get a different freaking kicker. And I wonder, again, if that played into it, where if Woody Johnson's sitting there like, again, maybe he told the Joe Douglas he couldn't get a quarterback last year. That might have been the case. Maybe he told him they couldn't get a kicker. But if that wasn't the case, and Joe could have gone a kicker, and Joe could have gone a quarterback, and he stuck to his guns and didn't do anything, it's not just one season he potentially tanked, it was 2. Because Greg Zuerlein should not have been allowed on that plane to London, but he was. The Jets kicking game was a major issue, and it seemed like everyone else, every fan, every media analyst on here, everyone that talked about the Jets saw it except for the New York Jets. And that was a big problem. And look, Joe Douglas, I don't know, Dano. I wish I knew. Can't wait till I don't see Gruden coming. I just don't see that. Again, Kevin, I don't see that. So good as to overcome bad coaching. There were so many mistakes by Jay this year. That's frustration. And look, like for people saying Joe Douglas did such a great job, look, the 2022 was his magnum opus. That was his magnum opus. He built a good team. But as a GM, you can't just live off of one great draft. You have to continue to build a team. You have to continue to grow as a football team. And unfortunately, the Jets didn't. They drafted Izzy Abanaconda, who didn't make an impact. That you look at 2023, yeah, Will McDonald, Joe Tippmann looked pretty decent, but no one else in that draft looks like they're making an impact. Malachi Corley this year in a embarrassingly good wide receiver and playmaking draft. They drafted him, and he can't get on the field. And it all goes back to long term. If the Jets, we turn on the time machine, if they draft Tristan Wirfs, maybe we're in a different universe where the Jets have a left tackle and they can keep Morgan Moses at right tackle for long term. Maybe they have their 2 stalwart tackles for years. Maybe we live in a world where instead of having to pick a left tackle in this year's draft because the Jets' only tackle was an aging Tyron Smith, maybe they could have gone Brock Bowers, who looks like an elite tight end. But like I said at the time, the Jets were in a position where they had to take a tackle because they didn't do it the correct way. And I know hindsight's 2020 with 2023 because Broderick Jones has been terrible for the Steelers. Look, I get that, but the Jets also maybe could have been, I don't know, a little bit more aggressive in that draft. Maybe they could have tried to trade up to get like a Peter Skoronski, maybe a Darnell Wright. I mean, just a hunch. Instead, this year, they had to draft a tackle because they were forced to. They were forced to draft a tackle because they had to, because of their failings of not being able to develop a tackle, find a tackle. In looking at AVT, maybe the Jets, he was a left tackle out of college, which said they stuck him at guard. Maybe they should have developed him as a left tackle. And then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. But instead, they had to draft a tackle this year. And they missed out on some great wide receivers. They missed out on the best weapon tight end we've seen in a long time. But part of that because they didn't build this team effectively. If you drafted Tristan Wirfs, maybe it's a different universe we live in where Brock Bowers could be on the Jets. But we don't know. Maybe it's a universe where this year They drafted Bo Nix, who, again, was still on the board. They could have drafted Bo Nix potentially. And again, I think Bo Nix wouldn't have worked here because the offensive staff is terrible here. And he went to one of the best offensive minds in football. But the Jets, again, because of the past drafts, had to take a tackle. They had to take a tackle. They could have taken Brian Thomas, 23, went to Jacksonville, looks pretty damn good. But no, they had to take the tackle because they were stuck. Because they had to. And look, you look at the Jets this year, the Jets had to make that selection at number 11. And I'm trying to remember, I don't believe they had a second round pick because I believe that was in the Rodgers deal. Yeah, because it was the Rodgers deal. Because of the Rodgers deal, because they couldn't hit on the quarterback, couldn't draft anyone in the second round. And everyone talks about Malachi Corley. They had to get Malachi Corley, yet he can't get on the field. Can't get on the field at all. So look, Joe Douglas, my thoughts on him, I think he drafted better than the previous two GMs. I don't think that can be understated. But at the same time, when you are a GM in this league, you are judged on, can you get the quarterback right and can you get your left tackle right? And if you're in charge of picking the coach, can you get the coach right? And Joe Douglas was 0 for 3. They were 0 for 3. And that determined his legacy. If he hit on one of those three, we might be having a different story today. If he had a left tackle, maybe we'd be having a different story. Yeah, he did bring in a lot of talent. Yeah, he brought in Rodgers. But here's also a lazy narrative. The trade for Devontae, that wasn't him. That was ownership. And Reddick, yeah, he traded for Reddick. But, it wasn't until Woody basically came in and paid Reddick that he didn't play. So they butchered the Reddick situation. I'm sorry, but it is just so frustrating with this team because, again, you take 2022, which was a great draft. It was. The rest of Joe's drafts were okay to maybe decent. But once again, I will keep saying this. The biggest things for the Jets was they needed Joe Douglas to rebuild the offensive line. When Joe Douglas came in, the first thing he said was to Sam Darnold's parents, I am going to build you and your son an offensive line. And he, I guess, did. It just took until year 5.5. Just year 5.5. Then look, they tried. Again, I give Joe Douglas credit for trying, but he's put this team in a bad cap situation. His free agency has been hit or miss. And also with Joe Douglas and the Jets in free agency, how many times have we heard this? Well, the Jets were the second team. Oh, the Jets finished second in the negotiation. They never could just get over the top. They just couldn't get over the finish line. And look, the other thing too, I just remember looking at the Jets, I know you look at Joe Douglas. Again, Joe Douglas had his pick of candidates. And again, we look at the coaching staff there, And again, Joe Douglas was well respected in this league. He will get another job in this league. He drafted some great players. But again, he also made some terrible deals. You look at this roster. This roster is really imbalanced. They've never addressed the safety position. I mean, their starting safety right now is a practice squad player from another team. They never address the safety. Look, they did certain positions they've done well. They have a great corner room. They've found some decent linebackers here and there. But then they also didn't evaluate the talent on the defensive line. They did a great job building a great defensive line, and they tore it all down in one offseason. And again, Joe Douglas went. Bryce Huff, I know, has been terrible in Philly, but you let a homegrown player go for nothing. And I screamed at the time, you cannot lose Bryce Huff for nothing. You do one of two things. You tag him and trade him for a high pick, or you sign him. Or if you tag him, you keep him for another year and you figure it out then. They didn't do either of that. They just let him walk out the door. Then they traded John Franklin Myers. Didn't even try to renegotiate. Just traded him to save a couple bucks and get a 6th-round pick. Terrible move. Like, every decision that Joe Douglas, and look, a lot of the great decisions he made were in 2022 and 2023, which is why Aaron Rodgers wanted to come play for the Jets. But since then, and a lot of it's because of Aaron, I get it, but the Jets drafts have been okay. And really, outside of Michael Carter, day 3 picks haven't gotten a lot of second contracts with this Jet team. Have you noticed that? And if you want to be a great GM, you have to hit on those picks. But once again, this was the right decision. The timing's weird, but to me, the biggest things I take out of this are the following. Number one, the Jets are going into a complete rebuild, which again is a painful decision. But the Jets have to make this decision because the worst thing you can be in the NFL is being stuck in the middle. And really, the Jets they're at the bottom right now. But if they brought Aaron Rodgers back and everything, I think the best you're looking at is like an 8, maybe 9-win team. Is it really worth it to waste another year and burn all this more capital for that? No, like you need to rebuild this the right way. And I know it's tough because we've gone through so many rebuilds in the last 15 years. And I know it's frustrating because you don't feel they're going to get it right. But will they make the right decisions in the hiring? We'll have to see and hope. But at this time is the right decision for the Jets. They went all in on Aaron Rodgers. It didn't work. It probably failed 4 plays in last season. And when that happened, it changed everything. Maybe changed Joe Douglas's tenure, maybe change Robert Saleh's, but I do think perception is a big reality because the way Jet fans, and this is how I personally felt last year, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I felt last year this Jet coaching staff and front office got too big of a pass because they were too talented of a team, and especially on defense last year, to just waste a season. And they had opportunities. Aaron Rodgers went down 4 plays into the season. They had 8 weeks until the trade deadline. There were veteran free agents out there. They could have brought in Carson Wentz. And again, I'm not saying these are great options, but if you got anything from the quarterback position, absolutely anything from the quarterback position, that team could have at least been 8-9 wins and playing meaningful football in December, which we haven't seen God knows how long. But instead, they punted on that season. And then again this year, the kicking situation cost this team games. Who knows if Joe Douglas, who was asleep probably, says, you know what, Greg Zuerlein's terrible. You know what, I know we're eating a lot of money, but we can't let the special teams cost games. Let me change it out. And wait, we got a decent kicker, and now we're 3-2 or 3-3 after the Buffalo game. Maybe Robert Saleh isn't fired then. Maybe this team has a better shot. Maybe this team's in at the deadline. Maybe this team again. Maybe they don't make the playoffs this year. But at least they'd be talking about it. But in some ways, maybe this is a good thing for the Jets because we keep talking about the talent on this team. And I do think a better coach will get more out of this talent. But here's the sad truth. You are what your record is. The Jets are not a good football team. And I think this is a reality check that the Jets maybe need to make some tough decisions. Is Sauce a part of the long-term plan? Is Garrett a part of the long-term plan? Is Brees a part of the long-term plan? I hope some of them are, but you need someone in here to make decisions. And like I said, I think it starts with getting a president of football operations. I'd be looking at Curtis Martin. I'd be looking at Pete Carroll. And I do what Kerry Rhodes suggested, which is getting like a council of players. Like I bring in like Kerry Rhodes, Bart Scott, Willie Colon, Rex Ryan, former Jets that love this franchise, are passionate about this franchise, and more importantly, are like us as fans, are pissed where this franchise is right now, to help guide this organization to hopefully find the right GM and the right head coach and eventually the right quarterback. Because look, this team needs a reboot, and it's painful, and let's be honest, it sucks. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a tough decision, but unfortunately, this was the right decision. Thank you so much for joining us on Rich Sports Talk, your home for all the latest and greatest on the New York Jets. Make sure to give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our latest content coming down the pike. Of course, we'll be grading every single Joe Douglas draft pick in short order. Again, that's going to be a lot of, I shouldn't say fun. That's going to be quite the interesting dive. We'll review the picks, who was available, was it the right decision, and some of the best Joe Douglas picks and some of the worst picks. But all that and more coming later. So make sure you subscribe and don't miss any of that content. Also, check us out wherever podcasts are available. I'm your host, Nolan Rich. Until next time, this is Rich Sports Talk.